LSU running back John Emery tears his ACL. He's done for the year. So what does LSU do next at running back? We're talking about it. It's Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Glad to have you aboard with us here. We are free, available wherever you get great podcasts. So thank you for making us your first listen every day. You can also watch us on YouTube. So please subscribe on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. Smash the like button, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we go live. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Brian Kelly was on the SEC Coaches Teleconference on Wednesday. Had some interesting comments about the evolution of the defensive backfield, including some young players you're going to see this weekend against Nicholls. We'll get to that. But where else would we start but with the devastating news that LSU sixth-year running back John Emery tore his ACL in practice on Wednesday. His season is over. When John Emery made the decision to come back to LSU for a fifth season, I talked about John Emery's perseverance. When John Emery tore his ACL against Florida, I shared how disappointed I was for him. When he made the decision to enter the transfer portal, I lauded John Emery's career. When ultimately he made the decision to return to LSU for a sixth season, I praised him for that decision as well. It has been a rare day that I have cheered for an LSU athlete as much as or more than John Emery. And if anyone deserved a storybook ending, it's John Emery. And we see it from time to time. Sports can be cruel, just like life can be cruel. But sometimes it works out. Glenn Dorsey passed on millions of dollars after the 2006 season when he was going to be a first-round draft pick, made the decision to come back to school for a senior year, won the national championship, was still a top 10 pick. Matt Flynn, that same year in 2007, he had waited his turn, finally got a chance to start in his fifth year, wins the national championship. Sometimes the storybook ending happens in sports. But more often than not, sports is cruel. Just like life can be a kick in the butt sometimes. And it is really unfortunate for John Emery. You know his story. John Emery was a five-star. He was the number one running back in the country when he signed with LSU back in the class of 2019. And he contributed back in that 2019 season for the national champions, the most dominant college football team, the greatest college football team we've ever seen. And it only got more complicated for John Emery after that freshman season. Back in 2019, he had 36 rushing attempts for 182 yards, scored 3 times. In 2020, the COVID year, of course, that really derailed a lot of college football careers. But John Emery had maybe the best game of his career during the COVID season at Vanderbilt. And then we know what would happen after the COVID year. John Emery would miss the entire 2021 season due to an academic suspension. And I want to remind you that at that point, after that 2021 season, John Emery could have gone pro. He could have gone pro. He was 3 years removed from high school. Now, his draft stock wouldn't have been great because he just missed his third year of college. And so he wouldn't have had film from that season. But he still could have gone pro. And had he done that, John Emery would be entering his third NFL season this year. Instead, he's going through his second torn ACL now. Didn't have to come back, but did. New coach under Brian Kelly in 2022. Missed the first couple games that year because of academic issues, but he persevered. And maybe John Emery's the greatest play of his LSU career, of course, was that touchdown reception against Alabama in the game that, of course, LSU would win in overtime. Quintessential John Emery play. The plant on the sideline, the change of direction, the speed, the burst, it was all there. And after 2022, his fourth year in college, John Emery could have gone pro, but he decided to come back. to give it another go, to try to be a bell cow back, to graduate despite all of the issues he had in school. Came back in 2023, had more academic issues at the start of the season, got eligible, played well, and then tore his ACL in the Florida game in November. But John Emery persevered. He graduated, walked across the stage. Frank Wilson had a tweet. If you haven't looked it up, check it out. There's a picture of John Emery in his cap and gown, and Frank Wilson said, "This one just hits different because of everything that young man went through to get across the stage." Y'all, this is true in life. This isn't a commentary on John Emery. It's just the truth. School's hard for a lot of people. School was hard for me. I was not a great student. I worked very hard to make good grades. There are some people that are just brilliant. They're the kinds that make 27 on the ACT when they're in 7th grade. I wasn't that guy. And not everybody's supposed to go to college. Like, that's just a reality. It doesn't mean you're not smart. It's not the path for everybody. And John Emery, with his fantastic athletic ability, could have left after year 3. Stayed for 1, 2, and 3 more years. After tearing his ACL, he still graduated, entered the portal, decided to stay at LSU, and was LSU's best back Sunday night against USC. Was really pulling hard for John Emery this year. And it is devastating that his 6th season at LSU ends like this. Ends with a torn ACL and with him playing just 1 game. I know a lot of people are going to ask, could John Emery play a 7th season? It's complicated. So Brian Kelly did tell us this offseason that John Emery gained the 6th year of eligibility because of a medical appeal to the NCAA. And he said it wasn't necessarily a football-related type thing. I don't want to speculate on what that could have been. But remember, when John Emery lost that 2021 season due to academic suspension, that could not be used as a redshirt year. That was just a lost year of eligibility. So he played in 2019. The 2020 year didn't count. 2021 was a season that he lost. And then 2022, obviously, he played. So 2023 should have been his final year of eligibility. But he appealed to the NCAA, was granted that 6th season, which, of course, he started this year and played just 1 game, and now is the torn ACL. He could go appeal for a 7th season, and given all of the circumstance, he might win it. But does John Emery really want to try to battle back from another torn ACL and continue his football career? I don't know the answer to that. Only John Emery can answer that, and he'll have to do it in time. But unfortunately, his 6th season at LSU is overdue to injury. And a young guy that has persevered through so much, and maybe even more so, maybe it hits even harder for John Emery right now because of the era, because it is the portal NIL era, the era where it's never been easier for players to leave, to transfer whenever they want, to go wherever they want, to leave whenever they want. And by the way, I am not criticizing players that do that. There is probably nobody with a microphone and a platform that screams louder in favor of players being able to transfer and make money in NIL. I am not begrudging anybody that does. I'm not criticizing anybody that does. I'm just issuing a statement of fact, which is it's never been easier to leave, and there have never been more college football players leaving than there are now. And amid that culture, when he could have left at any point to go pro, to transfer somewhere else, NIL deal, whatever, John Emery stayed. And that made him a very likable figure, someone that you wanted to see have success. And it's really unfortunate that it's ended now for John Emery the way it has. He'll make that decision in time, what's next. But whatever is next for John Emery, he'll have a fan in me. I'll tell you that much. So John Emery's season is over, and that leaves LSU in a precarious situation at running back. I do want to talk about that as we continue. Locked on LSU, your team every day. Our show today is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Well, right now, we got a little something different for you. So now through September the 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. And you can cancel anytime. So visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. Again, FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. Of course, you can always go make that $5 bet on just about anything. The NFL season gets kicked off on Thursday with the Chiefs and the Ravens. You want to bet week 2 of the college football season? Tons of opportunity to do that. Might be tough to get odds on LSU and Nicholls, given that it's an FCS opponent. But certainly take a stab at LSU's long shot college football playoff or national championship odds. It's all there for you at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. So with John Emery's season over, this makes a precarious situation at running back for LSU even more dangerous. I'll just very quickly run through what we know about the running back situation, where they are. Remember, a year ago, LSU had 8 running backs. 8. And Brian Kelly got asked over and over and over again, man, what are you going to do with 8 running backs? How do you manage 8 running backs? And the point Brian Kelly made in the preseason a year ago in fall camp was the cream usually rises. And it did. Ultimately, a year ago, Logan Diggs was your best running back, and he became your lead running back. And Josh Williams was a really good player and was your second leading running back. And then John Emery had a role, and Trey Holly got to play against Army. And it was just sort of like that. Noah Cain had a role as well. Trey Bradford was on the team, but didn't play much. And so you saw that running back room of 8 players whittled down. Logan Diggs tore his ACL. He went to Ole Miss. Noah Cain out of eligibility. Of course, Trey Bradford transferred. So the natural attrition sort of happened there. But look at where you are now. It is the inverse of the problem. Last year you had too many. Right now you are dangerously thin. So with John Emery's injury, that leaves you with Josh Williams, who of course we know is wearing the number 18 jersey. That leaves you with Caleb Jackson, the sophomore that everyone is very, very high on, and me included in that number. Although, I certainly hoped for and expected more from Caleb Jackson against USC. Just 5 carries for 14 yards, averaged 2.8. His long was 4. We expected more from Caleb Jackson, just didn't see it against SC. And Josh Williams wasn't great either. 9 carries for 33 yards, just 3.7 yards per carry. It was John Emery who was the guy. 10 carries for 61, that long of 39. So now you're left with Josh Williams, Caleb Jackson, and then the true freshman Caden Durham, who didn't have a carry in the game against USC. And my guess is he'll get a workout in the second half against Nicholls coming up this weekend. Because if you're Brian Kelly, the absolute truth, the given at this point is you cannot afford another injury at running back. Given the fact that you only have 3 scholarship running backs available to you on the roster right now, puts you in a dangerous situation. So if you're going out there against Nicholls, the last thing in the world you can have happen is have Josh Williams or Caleb Jackson or Caden Durham running around out there, or certainly Williams and Jackson, late in the game where they don't have any business being out there. So I guess you're going to see a lot of Caden Durham in the second half. And the other part of that, too, is you just got to get Caden Durham ready to play, because you're a turned ankle away from him having to be a guy that you count on. And after the 3 I mentioned, you've got Tyson Edwards, who's a walk-on. He's a senior. You got Joseph Ebun, who's a freshman walk-on out of Georgia. DK Kensey, who's a freshman walk-on out of Harvey. Malachi Lane is a guy who we saw. He's out of Texas. He's a junior. He's been around for a little while. And it's another walk-on, but Malachi Lane's a guy who we saw play some special teams in fall camp and kind of work his way into the 2 deep. And when they were giving Josh Williams a blow, got some runs. So maybe if I had to guess right now, after the first 3, after Josh Williams, Caleb Jackson, and Caden Durham, I'd probably tell you Malachi Lane is the next guy. Or do you try a receiver at running back? That's a possibility. I mean, Xavion Thomas or Aaron Anderson could certainly give you something there as a change of pace. We've seen him in the jet sweep action, so maybe there's an opportunity there. But the real wild card here is Trey Holly. Trey Holly is the redshirt freshman out of Farmerville, Union Parish, who we know his story. Trey Holly is Louisiana's all-time leading rusher in Louisiana high school. Came to LSU a season ago, got buried on that depth chart where they had 8 scholarship running backs. And the thought was he would have a much bigger opportunity this year. And then we know what happened. He was arrested and charged in a shooting. The most severe charges were dropped against him. He has staunchly maintained his innocence. And when we were at SEC Media Days in July, Brian Kelly said point blank that he anticipated the Trey Holly situation would be resolved within a week or two, and that was in mid-July. Well, we know what happened. The judge had to recuse himself from the case in that situation. That was Jared Belton's father, Jared Belton is a staffer at LSU, sports staff member at LSU. So the judge recused himself. That caused a delay. Then there was a continuance in the trial. And the last update we had is that the continuance was until middle of September. So you're talking about another 10 days or so, 10, 11 days till you get the middle of September. So best case scenario here is that the legal situation is rectified here within the next 10 days to 2 weeks. And if that happens, then maybe Trey Holly is joining you for the UCLA game or the South Alabama game. And boy, does LSU need that reinforcement. It is not often that I would sit here and tell you, not often, maybe ever, as long as I've talked about or covered LSU, that I would tell you LSU needs a running back that has 11 career rushing attempts. But that's where they stand right now with Trey Holly. I mean, my goodness, 11 carries for 110 yards, the one touchdown that came against Army, that 67-yarder a year ago. But right now, it's the reality of the situation where you've got Williams, Jackson, the freshman Durham, and then you're on to walk-ons. So let's hope that this legal situation can get resolved because, look, Trey Holly has staunchly maintained his innocence, and the most severe charges were dropped, and it certainly feels like that's the end game where this is heading. But strictly from a football standpoint, you need Trey Holly back, and the timing could work out really well. Remember, we talked about this. I'm going to continue to circle that Ole Miss date. Your objective right now, if you're LSU, is use the next 4 weeks, the next 4 games to improve everywhere you can, to find out who you can count on, what your rotations are going to be, who are the guys that are really ready to emerge for this team at levels where you have question marks, certainly at running back, at receiver right now with some of the injuries that you've suffered in the defensive backfield, which we'll talk about here in a second. But absolutely, you got to use these next 4 weeks to figure out who you are and what you're best at going into your open date before Ole Miss comes. And it would certainly be a massive boost if you had Trey Holly back on this team to have another talented scholarship running back who can give you a little bit of a change of pace. John Emery, devastating that his season's over, but LSU has to move on, and they've got to figure out how to get these guys, the 3 scholarship backs that they have available, up to full speed, and hopefully get Trey Holly back maybe here in the next 10 days to 2 weeks. Okay, it is Locked on LSU, your team every day. Mentioned the Nicholls game coming up this weekend. Well, Brian Kelly was very direct on the SEC coaches teleconference about what you can expect, especially in the secondary against Nicholls. We're going to talk about that next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. Love to get to tell you here about LinkedIn Jobs. Here, a great partner of ours on Locked on LSU. Of course, over at LinkedIn, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you need to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. It helps you find professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open for a change in the perfect role. In a given month, more than 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. So you can post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Spell it out. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Again, post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Brian Kelly was on the SEC coaches teleconference on Wednesday, and he ended up discussing the secondary quite a bit, actually. And with LSU playing Nicholls this weekend, you would figure this is going to be a one-sided game. And in no uncertain terms, Brian Kelly said, expect to see the young safeties against the Colonels.
We're looking at Kylan, Deshaun Spears to definitely get a good amount of work. Jordan's nursing a bit of a deep thigh contusion as well, but can't play the first half. Jordan's got a bit of a turf toe as well, so he's cleared to play, and he practiced yesterday. So, right now, a three-man kind of rotation there at the safety position. So, yeah, you can expect to see a lot of work from those two younger players.
So I want to remind you, and Brian Kelly said it there, but Jordan Gilbert, who has the thigh bruise, as he mentioned, can't play the first half of this game after the targeting penalty late in the game against USC. So if Jordan Gilbert is dealing with a thigh bruise, is suspended for the first half because of the targeting penalty, I don't know that Jordan Gilbert plays at all in this game because, quite honestly, the game should be well in hand at halftime, and I don't know that you want to bring Jordan Gilbert back after halftime. There's no reason to do that. So, as Brian Kelly said there, Jordan Allen, who's battling a little bit of a turf toe, and then Kylan Jackson and Deshaun Spears. I'll remind you that on the game-winning touchdown run by Woody Marks on Saturday, the player who contacted him at the goal line was Deshaun Spears, the true freshman out of Denham Springs. So when Jordan Gilbert was ejected for targeting, the player who went in to replace him was the true freshman, Deshaun Spears. My contention about Spears all along has been I could see a scenario where he's starting at the end of the year. Probably not in Jordan Gilbert's place. I think Gilbert's your best safety, but could be starting at that other spot in Jordan Allen's place, who had been a little hot or cold so far through fall camp. But I think this is a game where you don't see Jordan Gilbert play. There's no reason to bring him back after halftime, especially if he's nursing an injury. Get those young guys reps and experience in Tiger Stadium against a team that physically they match up well against. I like Deshaun Spears getting significant action against Nicholls far more than I would saying, hey, first game of your career in Las Vegas against USC in a Lincoln Riley offense. So excited to see maybe those young guys a little bit. Now, Brian Kelly was also asked about Zy Alexander. Speaking of torn ACLs, remember, it was Zy Alexander who tore his ACL on the last play of the first half against Army a year ago in Tiger Stadium. So, yes, I want to see LSU escape healthy from this game first and foremost against Nicholls. But Brian Kelly also said you can expect Zy Alexander to start ramping up.
I think what you'll see is his workload as it relates to plays will increase dramatically over the next 4 weeks, and it will start this week on special teams, and then will continue then to pick up at the corner position.
Brian Kelly has consistently said there were no limitations on Zy Alexander, that he was fully cleared, but it was really a matter of him trusting his repaired ACL, stopping and starting and being athletic and agile. But all throughout fall camp, we saw Zy Alexander running with the third team defense. For that reason, they were getting the guys that were healthy and 100% ready to go. But my contention all along has been, I think the best version of this defense is if Zy Alexander can find the form of a year ago where he was your best defensive back. I'm not saying he was great, but he was by a mile your best cornerback a year ago. If Zy Alexander can find his form Then Alexander and Stamps could end up being your corners. That allows you to kick Sage Ryan to safety, which is his more natural position that he's never really played at LSU. So that would be a huge win if you get Zy Alexander. And did you notice the timeline that Brian Kelly discussed? They're going to ramp him up over the next 4 weeks. Y'all, it don't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. Over the next 4 weeks, you are going to be a heavy favorite against 4 bad football teams. Use the next 4 weeks to figure out what you got with all of your players. Who can you rely on? Who's healthy enough? So when you go into that open date, you're preparing for 2 weeks for Ole Miss with a loaded gun, with every bullet in the chamber. It ain't a coincidence, Brian Kelly said, over the next 4 weeks, they're ramping up Zy Alexander. They have the luxury of doing that, using the next month to get him ready to go. Now, one more from Brian Kelly. He was asked about the cornerbacks, and he specifically started by singling out Jair Brown and J.K. Johnson, the 2 Ohio State transfers.
They have to continue to develop, and that's really where the cornerback room starts and ends, with Alexander, with Stamps, Woodland, the flexibility of Sage, and then Johnson and Brown. That's your cornerback room now, and that's most likely what your cornerback room is going to look like throughout the entire season.
He mentioned 5 guys. And he started with Zy Alexander. Now, he'd been asked about Zy Alexander before, so maybe that was top of mind. But Alexander, Stamps, Woodland. It's almost like it's in that order, because that's the order you saw it the other night, by the way. When Stamps or Sage Ryan came off the field, P.J. Woodland went in. And then he mentioned J.K. Johnson, Jair Brown. Now, we did see J.K. Johnson take reps with the ones at times in fall camp, and we saw Jair Brown as the number 1 nickel back. Every time they went nickel in fall camp, Jair Brown was the one who went out there. Remember, Jair Brown's the Ohio State transfer. He's wearing number 17. J.K. Johnson transferred from Ohio State a year ago, but had the injury in fall camp, missed all of last season, has worked his way back, and had been taking reps with the ones. But you heard Brian Kelly also say the flexibility of Sage Ryan. I'm telling you, man, that is one of those situations where if you can get Zy Alexander back healthy, and Alexander and Stamps become your primary boundary cornerbacks, and then you've got Woodland, J.K. Johnson, Jair Brown there as well, fantastic. You can move Sage Ryan back to safety. The other thing that I found really interesting there, notice Brian Kelly didn't mention Javen Toviano. Now, Toviano played a lot as a freshman a year ago. We know he had his arrest this offseason, but he's a guy we also saw moved around a bunch in fall camp, and maybe the spot where Javen Toviano has landed is at that star position, because I did reference this. One of those 11-on-11 drills we saw in fall camp, one of the throwaways by Nussmeier was a star blitz pressure from Javen Toviano playing that star role behind Major Burns. So starting to figure out who's going to fit where on this LSU team. And a game like this gives Brian Kelly and the coaching staff an opportunity this weekend to try a lot of different guys in a lot of different roles to see who plays well, to earn the reps when you go to South Carolina a week from Saturday. Okay, y'all, that's going to do it for us here on Locked on LSU. Thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Now go check out the Locked on College Football podcast. It's linked in the description of this episode, so you don't even need to search for it. It's part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Do us a favor, if you're on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and please tell a friend that if they love the Tigers, we got you here every single day for Locked on LSU, your team every day.